everyone. Welcome to This Is Whole Life. We, every single week, bar none, even if there's nobody in town. I've once done it from Hawaii. Just
why aren't we doing this every week? I mean,
right?
What are we doing here?
I know.
In frozen Florida.
Maybe this needs to be a traveling podcast. I'm just saying.
I would just want to say that when we say frozen Florida, all of our listeners in other parts of the land are feeling not sorry for us whatsoever.
Not an ounce.
That 45-degree weather, no.
I've mentioned recently, probably more than once, that I have a new vehicle, and while I have been really grateful since, I think I got it in July, AC. And I'm like, man, that's great. This morning, I was really thankful for heat because the other truck didn't have heat either. It didn't have AC or heat.
How does a vehicle not have heat?
I'm
serious. I've never been in a, because the heat comes right off the motor, right?
No.
But no.
It's a thermostat was probably bad, or a combination of that and the heater core not working.
Wow.
Then you really get no heat at all.
Dude.
Even in a truck that in the summertime you can feel you can just feel the heat coming through the floor.
Yeah, it's definitely time to retire that vehicle. That's, when your heat doesn't work, that's like...
Yeah, I just got an offer on it yesterday, too, while I was out in my front yard. So,
okay.
$500, going quick, people.
Oh, my word. Take it and run.
That's what I'm saying. So, anyway, this is the podcast where we go deeper into the messages we are talking about every week here at Whole Life Church in Orlando. The frozen...
Tundra.
Can't be the tundra.
Oh, come on, let's go with tundra.
Could it be tundra? Well, Miami was playing on the tundra on Thanksgiving. Gobble, gobble.
Yeah. They look at that look on your face.
Randy's a happy guy since Thanksgiving.
Well, Miami's never won in below 60, right? Or something like that.
Tua is their quarterback. That's the stat that's going around that hasn't won a start with the temperature below 47, I think.
I thought it was Miami in general, though.
It could be. I mean, it's just... It's not their fault. I mean, I wouldn't want to go up there and get hit.
Kind of like the lizards that lay on my garden hose to warm up.
They're laying on their back until the sun hits them. Come around the corner. Come around the corner.
Lady, I'm having a rough morning. Can you please not eat me until I get warm?
I feel like if I were Miami, I'd just forfeit the game and be like, we're just staying in Miami.
That's right.
We're not. Why? We're not.
We're going to cut game checks by 50% because you didn't actually play, but...
Whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's worth it. No injuries and an extra bye week.
And if this is your first time...
We know we're going to lose anyway, so...
If this is your first time joining us, we also double as a sports podcast occasionally. Foodies Are Us happens quite frequently, which we haven't done a foodie section for quite a while. I feel like we're due. And since we haven't been together since Thanksgiving. Lucas, what was your favorite dish you ate on Thanksgiving Day, for the Thanksgiving meal?
For the first time, I tried a sweet potato.
I'm sorry.
You never had sweet potatoes before?
No, I had, but it was the mashed sweet potatoes with marshmallows on top.
Like the good.
Yeah,
sweet.
It was my first time trying this.
Yeah. Did you like it? Randy's making gagging.
I loved it, to be honest.
Visuals over here.
I loved it.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
No matter what Randy wants to say.
That's it.
I really liked it.
I'm not a huge sweet potato fan outside of that dish that you're talking about. You throw marshmallows and brown sugar at it. And it's hard to not make it.
When I look at the dish, I was like, I'm not sure.
All right. Also, important question: Were there any walnuts or anything like that in it?
No, just
walnuts.
Yes, it actually is pretty good with that. I think
candied walnuts.
Yeah.
Nice. That add a little crunch.
Yeah.
But it went really well with turkey and everything. So.
Nice. Ken, since we had a carnivore here, we'll go to a vegetarian next.
Oddly enough, we did not have that dish at ours, which I guess next time I'll have to travel to Lucas's. But
please come.
So our family has this tradition. Most as vegetarians, we do things different. But we make cottage cheese loaf is what it's called. It's or special K loaf, depending on what
Rice Krispie loaf if you're gluten free.
Yeah, but special K is better.
Rub it in.
I'm sorry. I can't help the many intolerances that some people have.
Wow. I think I just added another intolerance.
And there we go. right to your left. So yeah. So in our family, we don't. The traditional making, you make it kind of in a like a dish, right? It's like a pan. No, our family makes it in muffin tins.
Yeah, betcha.
And that is the best way because
Wow.
you get crispy,
On all the sides.
all the way around. It's really excellent. So I'll go with that for my Thanksgiving. It's like the muffin tin is the way to make Special K or cottage cheese loaf, whatever you call
Wow.
it. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna have to go back.
Whether you're using Rice Krispies or Special K.
Either way.
Yeah.
Well, being that we were carnivore, vegetarian, let's go back carnivore. We'll finish vegetarian.
No, you'll finish gluten-free and vegetarian.
Really anticlimactic,
Wow.
but go ahead, Randy.
Wow. No, actually,
I had a carrot.
oh man! Wow, the directness is real.
And an apple for dessert.
Since there's already an intolerance being built up, I'm just going to feed that thing.
Gonna feed it. I love turkey, but this year I don't know what Heather did to the turkey, but it was like so spot on. It was juicy, it was tasty, and I'm gonna go with that and a double of mashed potatoes. And if for anyone that has never tried it, I'm just saying, just give peace a chance. You take your mashed potatoes, and of course you have a little butter, and then I like to just run. I don't care how you've salted it. I like to run just a nice light round of salt, little sea salt over the top of that, and then some nice cold cottage cheese. You got to eat these first. So then it's the hot, it's the butter, it's the salt, and then it's the cold finish.
So hang on, slow down. So that's mashed potatoes with butter,
A little butter on
sea
top,
salt
little sea salt, and then
and
some cottage cheese on top.
on top.
And then you mix it, so there's a little bit in
I
each
don't
bite.
know. You are giving Lucas a hard time. Like, I don't like cottage cheese in the first place. I mean, unless it's in a loaf and,
I was gonna say, unless it's in a
really,
loaf.
really well done. I have to
be
not
mushy.
know it's cottage cheese. It's like, I don't know. It's just,
Yeah, no, that's a delicacy where I come from.
I don't know. It
Cottage
feels just, I don't know. Okay.
It's a
Rochelle likes that.
Yeah.
She'll eat cottage cheese just right out of the.
just like in your chili too,
no.
hot and cold.
Oh, no, stop.
All right, Melanie.
I told you it was going to be anticlimactic. I was flying solo, so I just ate whatever was in the refrigerator and
Wow.
went back to
Whoa.
work.
I know this
Wait,
is a
wait,
this
fly
is a
solo
super.
where?
Yeah, this is a super set.
You
No,
you were not here in Orlando.
She
I
was.
was.
Melanie Bachman.
I know.
We had room at our table.
I did have some lovely invitations, so it was. It
She
was.
was. If you know Melanie, the biggest Thanksgiving for her is solitude.
Thanks, dear Lord. I'm
Being
thankful
away-
for this.
being
I'm
away-
thankful for these leftovers.
Being away from the irritants that,
Being away from the intolerant people in my circles.
Yeah, it was really short. It was like, let's go around the table and see what we're thankful for.
Well, that does sound up, actually, kind of. That sounds all right.
I think we talked something this week about what were there were family and then there was the chosen family.
Yeah.
So maybe that's you define chosen family the way you want to. I guess we're not gonna penalize you for that.
I guess
Oh
not.
man, and we did have Rice Krispie. I think that was because my niece and her fiance, who I got to meet, fellow Brazilian.
Oh, nice.
They are also vegetarian, so we had bird and the other, and they didn't do the. If you don't like the crispy, then at our house it usually has to be one of each, because Heather's not the crispy person, so it's like because it's
No.
got to have the loaf.
Okay.
And for the rest of us who just want to, Ellie and I for sure, we want to scarf down all the crispy you can
Oh, yeah.
possibly get. And if you want to char mine, just on the edge of char, I'll be
Yes.
okay with that.
That's all right.
Yeah.
It's really hard in my book to overcook
Yeah.
cottage cheese loaf.
I've heard the word burnt thrown around really loosely.
Yeah.
And when it comes to cottage cheese loaf, or as Emily would call it, it's her favorite dish, pot loaf.
pot loaf. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why it's pot loaf, but it's pot loaf. So if you want to ask her to lunch and she says, "What are we having?" and if you say chicken and French fries, of course, chicken nuggets and French fries, it'll be her absolute favorite pizza, and then pot loaf. That's it.
Pot loaf. I like it. It's
Yeah.
pot loaf from now on.
That's
There
it.
you
Yeah, it is so carried. So, speaking of food, we began a new series this week called Origins, and the message was entitled "The Bad Apples on the Family Tree." So I felt like we were just
Or the bad lapels on the family tree.
or the bad lapels,
I have had so many people.
bad lapels.
I
boy.
had one person who's like, this was my favorite. They're like, I know you're crafty. So I was trying to figure out
Oh no!
what the hidden message in there was.
It wasn't purpose.
They actually went to a dictionary
No.
to see if there was something.
Is there something about this word I haven't
And
heard?
then they're like, but in French, it means, I don't know what it means in French. They asked, they had a child that speaks French, and they were like, well, in French, I don't think that's what it's going for. I don't know what it means in French, so if it's something bad, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Oh, I
But,
vaguely remember that from high school.
So yes, it was. There was no hidden meaning there. It was just a little typo.
and Lucas, that's not how you spell it in Brazil.
No,
Just
not,
go-
not even close.
Just go with it.
Yeah,
We would have
it
known
is.
the difference.
Yeah.
There we go.
If you want apples in Brazil, just ask for apples, and then you will be good.
So for all those of you who are
man.
very disturbed, and I had a couple, people who felt, I could tell it was just deeply disturbing.
Well.
We're sorry. Here's what happened. We caught it, and then we thought we had uploaded the correct file to correct that. And as technology will sometimes go,
He made the cut.
it didn't. The computer's like, no, it's going to be a
Not
lot
this
more
one.
fun for me to watch. You guys have to squirm later. So anyway, that's the story behind that.
Note to
Because
self.
that's what people are really looking for, the deep inside analysis of
They didn't
the
hear another
graphics.
word you said. It was
That's it.
all lapel.
Note to self: update the Grammarly subscription.
And
make it a pro.
if you're watching second service or you were at second service and you have no idea what we're talking about,
Go take a peek.
praise the Lord. That was first service.
Oh, mercy, that's funny. When you talk about families, one of my I think the first time I heard this, I was really trying to sit down and figure out where I'd heard it the first time, and I'm pretty sure it was a school teacher early on that said, you can pick your nose, you can pick your seat at the theater or church, but you can't pick your family. And I know I'm sure they weren't the first person to ever say that, but the first person that
That's so
I heard
funny.
it
I
from.
actually thought about using that in this sermon, and I, for some reason, did not.
And then I wanted to throw on the end, you get what you get, but you can't, don't pitch and fit.
Don't throw a fit. Yeah.
But not that it's going to do any good anyway, because it is what it is. You can't change it. And I thought it was interesting, the nature versus nurture. And I was like, man, we're going to science class and maybe theology class here a little bit, because it seems like there's a little areas to play with in the margins here. And
So I got to tell you, I had somebody walk up to me after first service, and they said, "Hi, I wanted to talk to you about the study that you used."
oh no. Was it
And
peer-reviewed?
I am a professor at a major university, and I'm a professor of microbiology or something very scientific. And I was like, "Oh no!"
Oh, no, listen.
Anybody who knows me knows that ain't me. I read, but I trust the people I read. And he was like, "It's like, is that how bad did
is
I
it?"
make a mistake?" And he said, no. It was, he said, he said, in fact, he said, he said, I thought it was so interesting. I actually looked it up. I looked up the study you were talking about, found that. And he said, it's actually really interesting that there are, he told me, and so, if you're listening to this, please forgive me for butchering what you told me. But it was fascinating that so DNA, what he says is like, here's the more information. He said, so there's the DNA that kind of makes you have your eye color and, your height and, the kind of your genetic code, the DNA. But then he said there's these particles, I think he said ethylthylenes or something like that. Anyway, there's this other thing that attaches itself to your DNA, these little bits and those are the things, if I was understanding correctly, he said basically if you have two two twins who share the exact same DNA, right? So they have the same. It's the reason one might be obese and the other one is not, and one would have certain traits and others, but because basically as you the things that you eat and put in your body, the life experiences, these molecules attached to your DNA and create these characteristics of you. Anyway, I haven't had a chance to dig further, but I thought it was a fascinating thing. For those of you who love science and care about that, start looking that up. I thought, and we always have the coolest people that show up at Whole Life. He was visiting a family member,
nice,
here at our church this week, and great guy, came up and had just added fascinating stuff. And I really actually thought, I wonder if I can figure out how to add this into the second service message. And I thought, no, I will absolutely blow it if I try, like perhaps I did today. I don't know, but anyway.
Well,
but we worry less about blowing it on the podcast, because you all are very discerning people, and
you'll send us a note
full of grace.
If it'll be nicely written, though.
Yeah, of course,
of course. The thing that made me kind of wonder about that section is, you're one of these items you're biologically inheriting from your parents and the DNA and the bloodline, and the other part is the values and the way that you're raised. And I wonder, as you try to think about growing up and things that you feel like, because I feel like a lot of times we end up assigning certain behaviors that may be similar or certain traits, and it's like, well, we know where you got that from. And sometimes, it seems pretty obvious, but how much of each of those do you feel like you were raised with? Was it like the nurturing that was overcoming the biological? And, what kind of person did that make me if one would have been stronger than the other? And I guess it doesn't really matter because it is who we are at the end of the day. But I don't know.
It's just such an interesting conversation, though, about how the way that we're nurtured impacts our lives, and how the way that what we inherit. Because as I talked about in this sermon, there's been studies that have been done that show that it's not just like your hair color and your eye color that get passed on. It's like even some of the traumas that your ancestors have experienced appear to potentially be passed on through the generations, and it's a strange thing to think about how, like, somebody's fear of water, or because they have a traumatic event in water, could be passed on to children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And yet, like I said, this study seems to indicate, and the first time I read the study, and I loved it, I actually got I got a lot of feedback on this sermon. I think I got an email from somebody or a text message, I can't remember which, and correctly saying, I've heard about that study you talked about because I read about it in a book called It Didn't Start With You, and which is actually the first place I read about that study. It's a pretty well-known study. You can, if you just type in mice cherry blossom scent shock into your search engine, it will pop right up, and it's out there quite a bit. But yeah, the first time I read about it was in a book called It Didn't Start With You. And they're like, oh, I read that book, and so they're like, I know where you got that from.
Well, I thought it was interesting in the study in the mice, in how it wasn't just those mice, but then their offspring that also carried this cherry blossom scent fright into their lives. And I tried to think of something in my life that I know one of my parents, like my mom, is really, really afraid of water.
Yeah.
And she's not a swimmer. If you go to the beach, she's always like, well, let me get my toenails painted so at least my feet look good when I go to the beach, because I'm not getting in the water. I'm not going to do that. If you go to the, when we were kids, we had some family that had a really nice in-ground pool in Wisconsin, which is almost unheard of, at least back then. And like,
was it a hockey rink during during 9 months of the year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you coming in? Nope. And then we heard the story about my dad's dad, when they were dating, tried to throw her in to a lake off the dock, and she ended up ripping the buttons off his shirt and like ripping his shirt, trying to make sure that she wasn't going in the water. And if I remember correctly, I don't think he got her into the water. Wow. And like deathly afraid. And then when I was a kid, I remember going to swim lessons at the YMCA, and my mother being so frustrated that like, no. I mean, I'll get in the water, but I'm not putting my head under. Not happening. And then later, for whatever reason, we were at a friend's house, and they had a pool, and everyone was swimming, and I was just sitting there. And then I guess I just decided that I would try to join the fun, and taught myself to swim in about 30 seconds after they threw me off the diving board and a bunch of other cruel tricks to try to make Randy swim. Yeah. And I immediately thought of that and thinking, okay, well, that's an easy, whatever, you conquered your fear of water, which not for some people, that's a real, like really serious thing. And it felt serious to me, but like, I thought more of what about the psychological things that we don't really understand, or that we don't really know what those origins are and where it might come from and what we might deal with. And that opened up a whole nother list of things in my mind of, see your grandparents, see your parents, and then you start thinking about things that they were concerned about and see if there was any. I just thought it was very interesting and a kind of a nice way to kind of look inside and wonder what you carried with and what you might still, what still might be there. And then when Ken, when you talked about the adoption story from that was a coworker of yours, correct?
Yes.
And that was it when you were on Guam?
Yeah.
Yeah,
KUM,
that's right.
Yeah, KUM News.
And I have identical twins as second cousins.
Okay. That
I grew up with. They were a grade behind me in our little 3-room schoolhouse in Green Bay all the way through academy. And it was funny as you were talking about that, certain situations that they went through, like even when we were in the academy, when one got injured, it was like immediately there was a knowledge, there was a feeling, and as much as you think like, well, yeah, but you're, your brother and sister, you're there all the time, you're the exact same age, so it's not like when you fight with your siblings or you don't like the same things as your siblings because they're older or whichever the case. They had that really, and they still do. I mean, when they get together, they were here at Whole Life last year, and they came over with some friends, and we laughed the night away. But it was really, you can still see that special bond, and it's really cool when you stop to think about how, like, even the little things you said that just attach themselves and make certain parts of us. After we got through all of that, and you were talking about generational trauma. And so many times I've heard people say, there's something wrong, but you have like no idea why or where man, excuse me. When you feel like you know that there's something bad that's happened, you don't know where it came from, and you don't know where to begin to try to find out what it is. And it's like identifying that there is trauma. Like maybe that's the key to it, and then trying to find it. But to hear people go through that before they like maybe have no memory and are just like there's always something just amiss. And I wonder how does that when you think about what's happened before you, and I just wonder how we deal or how we help people or how we help ourselves when you have that same feeling. When you're just like, man, something is not right, and I have no idea what it is. And the only thing that's like, well, maybe you should go talk to somebody. And it's like, well, where would you even start? Like, what's the because we had some people discussing, not necessarily questions, but just little pontifications here and there in the chat this week about it. And so I was just,
so here's what
we do.
Yeah, what I would suggest is it's a lot like if you had if you had DNA that gave you a higher probability of developing a certain kind of cancer. For example, if there are certain types of cancer that tend to be genetic, right?
Yeah.
And so if you know that's in your family, then you go ahead and get more checkups. You go see the doctor. Colon cancer, if that runs in your family, you're going to start getting screenings much earlier
than someone else.
than if that doesn't run in your family. And so I think that sometimes we tend to treat our physical we do a better job at, and not everybody does so, but we tend to do a better job of following up with a medical doctor about our physical conditions than we do with some of the emotional things. And so what I would say is that sometimes if you keep running into a trauma, a particular kind of trauma in your life, it is really worth going and seeing a good psychotherapist or somebody who can help you work on unraveling that a little bit. And the book that I mentioned a little earlier, Didn't Start With You, might be a good place for you to start reading, because in that book he talks about kind of how, in his opinion, to work through this. And I'll qualify that this is not a Christian book. I found it an interesting book because I like reading a wide variety of things. But one of the things that he gets around to is that basically if you work with somebody who knows what they're doing, you can start identifying some of these things that were in your life. And when you start identifying them, as I've said a number of times in so many different sermons, and I'm quoting, I can't remember who, but if you can name it, you can tame it. And so that's a part of the issue, is if you can kind of start saying, okay, I keep repeating the same issue in my life, whatever that issue, I have rage. Let's just use that one as an example. I quickly come unglued at things that wouldn't make most people come completely unglued, or there's a particular thing that really makes me get upset really quick. Those are things that are really worth taking a moment and saying, well, why is that? And doing that with somebody, it's like, you can read all the cancer research you want, and I would suggest that's great, and go see somebody who that's what they do for a living. They work on it. And the same thing is true, I think, with our mental and emotional health. Go ahead and read up on it, read books, get information. And if you're running, and I'm particularly talking about things that are detrimental to your well-being and the well-being of those around you, those behavioral issues that are really detrimental. Maybe they're holding you back at work, or maybe they're ruining personal relationships that you're in. It takes a lot of courage to delve into those things, because it feels more personal than a physical ailment does. A physical ailment, we're like, well, we couldn't help that. I mean, it happens, or maybe I could have helped it, but whereas I think sometimes with our emotional, mental health, we think, there's this, I think, really bad idea out there. Oh, well, I'm somehow to blame. That if I really struggle with my anger and rage, well, I just need to try harder. I need to go ahead and give it to Jesus and pray about it, and it will go away. And again, give it to Jesus and pray about it. I'd say the same thing about. I'd say the same thing about cancer. Give it to Jesus and pray about it, and go ahead and take care of the resource. Use the resources Jesus has put within your reach.
Sure.
And so I don't think there's no lack of faith for not dealing with it. And I just it really bothers me when people will not take prescribed medication for mental health issues when they would take prescribed medication for physical ailments. And again, I know this can be a long conversation about, and again, do your research. But my point is, we should treat our mind, in my opinion, almost more importantly than the rest of our body, because that's where everything kind of gets set. And so, again, if it's something that it's just reoccurring, it's really debilitating to you, it's keeping you from achieving the things you want, it's really worth investing in and somebody who can help you sort through that. And again, mental health professionals. We're actually suffering from a shortage of those in the United States right now, and it's something that's really needed. But go look for them; they're out there. If you need help with it, you can contact the church. Anderline, who's our Justice Ministries pastor, has a list. Freud, myself, we can help you look for the right person if that's something that you would find useful. Yeah. And if it's a little bit more personal and you don't really want to talk to one of us about it, I just encourage you to get your favorite search engine and just start looking for those mental health professionals. Read their reviews. Look at who's rated well, who's not. Because and the other part when you're looking for a mental health professional, just remember, just like you're not. We've all had the doctors that we really get along with. Like you go and see them, and when they tell you something, you're like, okay, I believe you. And then we have the ones that you're like, I don't know. I don't know about you. And so it's really important that if you don't click with a behavioral health professional, fire them. And I say that in a nice, but move on. Find somebody that you do click with. Any good behavioral health professional will tell you if you're not clicking with them, please find somebody else. Yeah, hopefully they do that. Somebody that you can be honest with and open.
I really found the section where you talked about Matthew and Luke, like laying this out, the genealogy and what mattered and to who they were talking about, and then that made me think, well, where does Randy fit into this when you think about these stories and how it seems like they were very intentional about who they were writing to, how they were writing, what they were including, what was important to them, just like any of us that would be writing would lean towards those tendencies. And I thought, what have I taken from this and how would I apply it? And really, the thing that I came up with was, I guess it didn't necessarily matter. It is interesting to think about and to look at how they did it, but Jesus' lineage was pretty sketchy,
to say the least.
Right, to say the least. And while I feel like that makes me, I don't know, feel like, well, at least, I feel a little, maybe a little bit more of a connection. Like, well, that's pretty messed up because, you can think about Uncle Bob or Aunt Joni or whoever that's like a little crazy, and those names don't mean anything to anyone. Those are just random names, so don't go look it up, see what's going on. But why, at the end, the grand scheme of it, why does any of this matter? Like, what if Jesus' lineage was just filled with royalty, like the best livers, doers, thinkers of the past? And I mean, what does this change in the grand scheme of things for what he did if he was going to do the same thing anyway?
I want to throw that over to Melanie, not because I'm happy to deal with it, but I just haven't heard Melanie talk very much today, so I feel like
let's go.
I've just been over here researching.
I saw that. Did you find anything else interesting that we should
epigenetics? Know? Yeah, no, it's interesting. I'm gonna have to dig into that some more.
We're also, Karen, we're gonna also need another bookcase in Melanie's office now.
We already do. I got to get those boxes off the floor. So anyway, I think I would say that I think that there are people who would look at Jesus and say, oh, well, he had every advantage. Look at him. He had this wonderful DNA. He didn't actually have to deal with the things that we had to deal with. And, there are places in the Bible that talk about Jesus as our high priest who's experienced what we've experienced. And I think having a long list of interesting DNA information, influencing who he was and how he was, makes Jesus more relatable.
And maybe more superhuman, like superhero type, like, man, you overcame all that?
Really overcame.
And then the idea that, and then I don't remember what point you were making when you were, I think it was just about his background, but Joseph wasn't his biological dad. I mean, he had all the things that anyone that you might know, maybe yourself, have gone through. And relatable, I think, is a good word. But then, Ken brought it all together with, God adopts us into his family. And, is that the family you want to be in? Is that the family you're choosing to be in? And, I don't know why those questions always like hit home, and because it's like it's in a message, it's in a prepared, like we've taken you now through this journey. And at the end, you're like, well, yeah, of course. But then when you stop and think about it, you stop and think about what's been going on in your life, what's been going on around you, the people that you see all the time, like your coworkers, like their lives, and you just start to think about it. And it was something that something yesterday after I took Ellie back to school, and it was just me in the truck and on the way hour and a half back home, and I was just thinking about, would every time, if I was being honest, if I asked myself that question every morning, or maybe every evening, I'm just not a morning person. Maybe it would be better to ask me at night. But is that the answer every day, every single time? In my heart, like, is my heart in that place? And it just made me think about it, and it made me think about choices that you make and this is just going back to kind of the things where you feel like there's maybe a spot missing in your life, or there's something you're up against a wall someplace, and part of it was, are you leaning on God? Because that to me is kind of what makes a decision really true, or makes me feel like it in this situation or in that situation where I really could use some help. Am I leaning into God as much as I should? Not to say that I haven't, but did I really give it to him? Did I really take it and leave it and sit with it for a while? So I think that was the ending made me think a lot more than I thought it was. I was like, oh, well, that's an easy, at first that's an easy one, of course. And then when you sit with yourself for a little bit, when there's nothing else happening, you're like, oh, well, maybe I can improve a little.
Well, you know what I think is interesting is, Matthew and Luke go to a lot of trouble to lay out Jesus' genealogy. And ultimately, there's the idea of being adopted into God's family, and Jesus calling us, siblings. But when we find Jesus in the Gospels in a couple of different places where people make direct reference to his family, he distances himself a little bit. Yeah. Because, like, for example, somebody came and said, hey, Jesus, your mother and brothers are out here. And Jesus says, well, my mother and my family are the people that do the will of God. Or somebody else came along and said, oh, blessed is the womb that carried you. And Jesus says, well, you know what? Even more blessed is,
Yeah.
So, but not that Jesus didn't care about his mother, because we see in the story that he even makes sure that at his death on the cross that somebody's there to take care of his mother.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a little bit of a dual track that we're talking about. We're talking about our blood relatives, and then we're talking about a bigger picture of connection. And I think it's kind of interesting sometimes to think about our close connections, but then our overall connection with the rest of humanity. And yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but that's where we ended.
I think looking at these genealogies, they're fascinating to me. They're, especially when you start really going back and looking at these stories. And there's the stories that you know, and then there's the people that's just a name on the page. That's it. That's all there is there's no real information about them. There's the people like Zerubbabel that maybe you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about, but if you read the book of Nehemiah, you read a book of Ezra, I think maybe it's more Ezra, you find Zerubbabel's story there.
How do you not want to know more about a person named Zerubbabel?
That's what I think. So, but you start looking at these people, and you start realizing that they're very human. They're very much like you and me, and this is what Jesus was a part of. This is what he that's his family history. There are the people that are these pillars of the faith, and these people who are, these heroes, whether it's Abraham or David, and yet both Abraham and David are incredibly flawed people, incredibly flawed people. And then you have these people that we wouldn't necessarily make into heroes that the Bible does. For example, you think about like Rahab. Rahab was a sex worker who, it looks like she ran a brothel in Jericho. And when the spies come to spy out the promised land, they go to spy on Jericho. And where do you go if you don't want to, where do you go if you don't want to be recognized? You go to the local brothel, right? Because that's where everybody coming into town would have been going. And so they go there. And when the city starts looking for them, Rahab, according to Hebrews, by faith hides them, and provides for them and makes sure that they're safe, gets them out of Jericho safely. And then says, look, and when you guys come back and conquer this city, will you please spare me and my family? And then it appears that she goes on to marry maybe one of the spies, or at least somebody from Israel. And she gets adopted into the family, and this would have been a Canaanite woman. She gets adopted into the Israelite family, which is fascinating, particularly if you read through the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, that was allowed and it was okay that happened for her. And then she gets mentioned in the right Hebrews 11, right? The faith chapter is, I think, Rahab's mentioned there, and so these are, maybe these aren't the ancestors that you would highlight in your genealogy. And yet Matthew does. Matthew goes to lengths because this is a hero. This is somebody who does something spectacular. There's faith in this person. And again, for me, the hope there is not it's an idea that so many times the labels and things that we put on other people are not very important to God. It is the faith that they display, the faith that they have. And sometimes the people that we as a society really give a hard time to, God says, well, you know what? You don't know their whole story, and you don't know who they really are, and you don't know what I know about that person. And so that's one of the things I love about it. And then there's the people that, like, the King Davids and the Abrahams, who are, these big names, but then you see what it took for them to get where they're at, and then you also see what happened when they did get where they were, to this big place, and they make mistakes, and incredibly big mistakes. And to me, one of the most fascinating things about it is that God takes David's line through Solomon, which is this the product of a murder and an affair. And that's part of Jesus' genealogy. It's part of where he came from. And
that's a crazy story all in itself when you dig it really deep into it.
Yeah, there's a lot there that would be fun to do in a sermon, but I don't know. We'll have to think about if there's I don't know how kid-friendly
it would have to be
is.
dramatically redacted.
Yeah.
Let's get to the questions that we had. We only had a few because we covered at least one, and some of them are kind of along the same thought pattern. But Matthew asked, so in a dysfunctional family, what approach can one take to settle differences, to make common ground, even to the ones who are so hard-headed and don't take too kindly to change, especially when it's for the better? What would be the Jesus approach? I love you, Matthew. That's a great question.
That sounds very oddly specific, Matthew.
Yeah. we cannot confirm or deny. But
Cannot confirm or deny.
Oh man, that's just such a loaded question. We've all been there, and the Jesus approach. If only I knew.
Well, I mean, let's look at the Jesus approach to it. There's points where he's very tender with his family, and there's points where he's very firm with his family. When his brothers and mother come to find him because they think he's gone insane or he's lost his mind, he says, "Hey, no, don't have time for this. We're not going to do this." And then there's, like Melanie mentioned, when he's on the cross, he remembers his mother and says to John, "Please take care of my mom. This is your new son. This is your new mom." And so again, in dysfunctional families, there isn't a easy answer to it. There's not a, well, do this, and everything gets worked out, because you can only do what's on your side of the fence, and it really does take two people to decide they want to try to work together to fix things and to grow things. So one of the things I would just say, don't get discouraged if that doesn't happen. I mean, you can only do with what's in your grasp. You can be kind and loving, and there's nothing not kind and loving about also having firm boundaries, that when somebody's abusive, verbally or otherwise, just say, "Hey, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. I love you, but I'm not going to put myself, if this is how it's going to be, then I'm going to remove myself from that situation." And, the other part that I would just say again, as I kind of said earlier in this podcast, is if you find yourself in a really difficult situation like that, this is where finding a good behavioral health professional can be super helpful to you, because they can go into the details of what's going on, and they can give you some really good advice on what it looks like to make good boundaries in your life. I remember there was a point in my life where I was dealing with an issue inside my family that was super difficult to know what to do, and went to a counselor and sat down with them, and they helped me make some really difficult decisions on how to handle that situation. But I don't think I would have made the right decision without them, because it's too personal, it's too up in your face, and that counselor was able to give me the ability to see the situation with a little bit more depth, and also to be able to say, well, this is the reality.
Yeah.
You can disagree with me. You can do what you want. But
Sure.
This is. I have seen this before, and this is what happens.
Not new.
And so I just really encourage you. Seek out good people to help you. Here on our pastoral staff, we're happy to sit down and chat with you. I always tell people, at least in my case, I'm not a trained mental health behavior person. I just got my executive coaching. I'm excited about that. But I'm not a mental health, behavioral health professional. And so I'm happy to sit and listen, happy to dialogue. And sometimes that's really all you need. You just need somebody to listen to you, ask you a few questions and listen to you. And then sometimes there's some really deep issues that you really need to find somebody who's an expert who can help you with that. And I always like to say I'm like the EMT on an ambulance. I can get you to the hospital. But I'm not going to do brain surgery.
And let the experts take it from there?
I'm not going to do heart surgery.
Well, I kind of feel like
Nor do you want me to.
I kind of feel like that's maybe the answer for all the questions. Stanley asked, how can we still honor our parents if they give us generational trauma? Which, I don't know if there's parents out there that didn't give their kids some form or even some degree.
So I think we also have to acknowledge there's different kinds of trauma, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there's the trauma of a parent who is yells at their kids versus a parent that is like physically or sexually abusive. There's different kinds of trauma there, and so there's different ways. Yeah. That I wouldn't want to say there's a one size fits all for that. What I would say is that particularly just kind of highlight what you said, we all are probably passing generational trauma on to our children in some way or another. And for, I believe most of us do not want to be doing that. We are heartbroken when we go, oh yeah, I could have done that so much better. Yeah. I could have done this better. I did pass this on to you, even though it was like the last thing I wanted to do. And so maybe we just give our parents the grace that we would like to receive in their situation, in in many cases, and maybe in other cases we give them grace, but it's the grace of forgiveness. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship can be renewed because of the extent of the trauma that's gone on. But again, for me, it's as I think about those things, I just know what I would like for my children to do for me. And so that's maybe how I relate with my parents.
I think it's interesting. I read an article recently about the growing number of adult children who are disowning their parents.
Ouch.
And it seems like it's more of a growing trend, which is interesting. I skimmed the article. I didn't read it with great, intentionality, but I wonder if with this growing disengagement from like brand loyalty, if there's also a growing disengagement with, just because I have your DNA in my system does not mean I have to subject myself to you. And I can see that going two ways, because if it's a toxic situation and you need to remove yourself and your children from a toxic situation, then that might be what needs to happen. On the other hand, if it's just a situation where there are disagreements, or there's a little bit of value rub or something like that, disengaging that way doesn't really give you the opportunity to work through it or fix it. And I wonder sometimes if that's why we have these family relations, to put us in proximity with people that we actually have to grow with. That doesn't mean that sometimes you don't grow away from, but
Sure.
There's also the opportunity of growing with, if that relationship remains open or can remain open.
And what a great point, Melanie. That's I think I skimmed that same article that you're talking about, and it is concerning that I think there's one thing about, like I said, in super abusive situations where this is what needs to happen, but there is, I think, a growing trend because of and forgive me for maybe taking a pot shot at the easy target, but I do think that social media has something to do with this, because we have kind of created for ourselves these echo chambers that we can live in, where all the people agree with us, and we're all, kind of saying the same thing or on the same page, and so, and social media does that. The platforms are actually set up to feed you what you're wanting to see and hear and read. And so I wonder if that's starting to build up an intolerance in a lot of our lives for opinions that differ with us, people who have different ideas about things, to where we're beginning to separate ourselves out in the real world the same way we would do in the online world. And I think that's incredibly dangerous, and it's not healthy. If you want to grow, I am so grateful that I have put myself into proximity with people that I don't agree with or that had different, because there have been times where I was the wrong one. I had the wrong idea of what was going on, and by being in proximity, I grew and I changed in positive ways for my life. And then there's other times where I still believe I'm the right one, but understanding their viewpoint has helped me be more nuanced in the way that I go about living my life and the things that I do. And there are a lot of people in my life that I love and care about very much that just don't see the world the same way that I do. They maybe don't vote the same way I do. They don't maybe think theologically the same way that I do, but they bring value into my life. And the key here is how can we love each other? 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, love is kind. How do we go about that kind of love for people when they don't agree with us? And sometimes when the conversation does get the decibel level goes up a little bit, how can we go ahead and still say, well, just because the decibel level went up and just because we got upset about it doesn't mean that they're a bad person, or that it just means that we're both passionate about this thing. And that's, I think, I think that's something that we probably need to be grappling a little bit more with as a society, because the easy thing to do is write somebody out of your life, because, and I shouldn't say easy, because it can be very painful and hard too. But what really takes a lot of work is trying to repair a relationship. And and I think one of the reasons repairing a relationship is hard is because if you really want to repair a relationship, it is very, very rare that one person is completely in the wrong. Usually that both people have things that they need to admit that they've been wrong in, that the ways they behaved. Not always, but most of the time, both people have work that they need to do, and it means you have to look inside yourself and say, "Hey, there's ugliness there that I don't like to admit," and it's painful to go ahead and say, "Oh, you know what? I didn't behave in the best way here, and I did help contribute to this problem, and this isn't. They're not the villain, and I'm not the hero. There's some combination of both for both of us."
Finally, Trifina was watching this past week on Facebook and asked, how does one stop feeling guilty for bad lineage? And I'm not sure there's much you can do about where you came from, but also I get where if you feel like there's people in your past that, maybe you're close enough that you can remember, maybe that's part of what we were just talking about is, those situations where it's a dysfunctional family and, what's the approach? How do I deal with that? Because I'm not sure how you would.
Yeah, I don't think you can feel guilty for something that happened before you. Now, if you're feeling guilty for something that you are afraid is going to be passed down to, your future
Sure.
offspring, which I can't speak for everybody, but I have my own regrets of things that I wish that I had done differently with my kids.
Oh, for
sure. And so I think at some point, for me, it's been really cool to see how my kids have grown. And now that they're adults and they're living their lives and making decisions for themselves and deciding who they want to be and who they are, I know that there are changes that I made in my parenting. It was different from my parents. And I think that my children will parent their children differently as well. I think we can also learn in positive ways from our experience. And, so the hope is that there is grace for our mistakes and that growth can still happen, especially as the emerging generations take responsibility for who they are. They can't help, what their experience has been, but they can take ownership of who they are and who they want to be.
I think part of it too has been that's where the grace for your parents from you comes from, is when you make the same mistakes and going not realizing what they were up against until you're up against it as a parent. And then you have to say, wow, I don't want that to continue. And then you have to have the uncomfortable conversation with your child that's like, look, do you like it when dad does this? No, I hate it. Well, you're doing the same thing. And guess where you got it from? Like guess where it comes from, right? You're mimicking what you've seen, how you've been treated, and it's wrong. But from, at least in my experience, none of that was something that my parents were comfortable really talking to us about when we were kids. And then you don't hear it until you're much later in life, and you hear it from a grandmother, you hear it from an uncle, and it's like, oh, well, you don't know about this situation? Nope, nobody ever said anything. And then it starts to make sense. And when you hear the growth that your parents went through from the way they were raised without any really with no coaxing, no coaching, no help, just like they figured it out, and then it's like, I just don't want to be, you see their struggle in trying to overcome, and they're able to overcome whatever they did, and you go, wow, that's actually pretty good, because nobody actually sat down and said, this is a problem, and you should we should probably address it or work on it. It was just, everyone was kind of on their own. And so I feel like if I've seen things in my own kids that we've talked to them about, like, this runs in your family. These could be warning signs. This could be something you may want to, think about as you move forward. So I feel like if we continue the dialogue and we continue to be open enough about our own problems, which isn't always easy to do with your kids, then we make progress.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the ways that we can still be influential is to model what change looks like, and also be able to say, wow,
I got work to do.
I really messed up on that one. You know what? To go back and do this over again, I would have made this decision for you instead. And I'm sorry that I didn't do that.
Yeah.
But just that modeling of the ability to adjust and adapt and change over time as growth, I think, is beneficial.
Yeah.
Another aspect of that is with a counselor that I've been working with is the idea of amends as well. That it's not just saying sorry, but it's saying to that person, what can I do to make it right? I remember my brother went through addiction, and one of the more meaningful things in my life was something that had to have been incredibly difficult for him, is that he came to visit us and he sat down and he listed out the ways that he knew he had hurt us. And then he said, I'd like you to tell me anything that I don't know. And then he said, and now I would like to ask you, here's how I feel like I could make some amends, but I want to make the amends that you need. What can I do? Let me just tell you, like the courage that took. So Trofina, if you're only talking about how getting over guilt, in my life experience, once you go through that and you even if the person doesn't directly forgive you, it's powerful because you've done what's within your power to do. You've been honest. You've given them the opportunity. And that's why one of the things I strongly believe that 12-step programs are not just for alcoholics or people struggling with drug addiction. There's a lot of us that would benefit from working a 12-step program and walking through it in our regular life and just asking ourselves, who have I wronged? Have I gone ahead and this is really just very biblical stuff. Have I said I'm sorry? Have I admitted that I made a mistake? Have I given them the opportunity to tell me what I may not know? Because there's the part that you think that you've done to hurt people, but it's been surprising to me in when I have gone to people that I assumed I'd hurt, that they were like, yeah, that hurt, but what really hurt me was, and I hadn't even idea. I had no idea. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well that is. And so that's the part that I think that we need to really think about, is that part of this process is truly wanting to know. And that's painful because I don't really want to know. I don't want to think that I've hurt you, Randy. I don't want to think that I've caused pain to you. And yet if I have, the way towards healing is to have that conversation and then to say, I can't make it right, but I can make amends. And there's so many powerful examples of that out there. And there's a show out right now called Shrinking. And in that show, there's an alcoholic that has killed the main character's wife in a drunk driving accident. And the way that he goes about trying to make amends with this man and with his daughter is just touching. And again, I'm not recommending the show. There's a lot of bad language. There's a lot of other things going on in it. But what I'm telling you is, like, what was incredible to me, it was just watching what a good example of allowing somebody, because the daughter just goes off on this guy. I hate you. You ruined my life. You took away my mom. I have not, and he sits there and he does not, he basically said, I know there's nothing that I can say. And I am incredibly sorry. I think about this every moment of my life, about the big mistake I've made. And I will do anything that, if you yelling at me and cursing at me is what helps, fine. I'm here for that. So, and I just think that kind of courage is rare, but it's very Christian to be willing to own it. And I mean, we see that in David's life. He owns up and does that. So anyway.
Well, we are quickly past overtime. It's been a good conversation, and it's one that always, when you deal with family, there's many layers to the big. I feel like we've been at Outback and the Bloomin' Onion. You just keep peeling it back.
Although, Randy, I think there is one thing that is important that we should mention. We kind of talked about our Thanksgivings, and we've talked about some family interaction, and we can kind of laugh about our weird Uncle Bob or whoever it happens to be, but not everybody had a family to go home to this past week. And, for one reason or another, whether your family is gone, or maybe possibly more painful if you've been ostracized from your family and you don't have a family to be with. I think that's one of the reasons why we have the chosen families that we have. And we have, there's the idea of kingdom, and then there's the idea of kingdom. And that means that we do have a family. We have a family here at Whole Life. We call each other family. And so I think it's important just to mention that, for people who maybe don't have the same kind of familial stories or experiences that some of us have had, there is family for you. And we can be family for you.
Yeah. We'll even make potloaf.
We will.
I promise.
Potloaf.
I don't know.
Randy will put cottage cheese on it. It'll be amazing.
That's the mashed potatoes, though.
You can't have potloaf without mashed potatoes. That's rule number one. And if you're in Wisconsin, you would also put a little sweet corn with that. That's the full.
And cheese, of course, because Wisconsin.
I didn't think I had to mention that part. But
hungry.
You said you said the silent part out loud, but that's okay. All right, we're gonna finish with one of our favorite people who sent us an email this week that said, "Hello, favorite podcast." Anyone have a guess who it's from?
I'm going to think it's maybe somebody in Carolina.
No.
Carolinas?
No, right here at home.
What?
Really?
Favorite podcast. I just wanted to say how amazing this week's sermon was. It was one of the best ones this year for me. So relatable and refreshing. Being such a perfectionist and total control freak, I'm my own worst critic at times and don't feel worthy of being God's child. This was a great reminder that Jesus came from a messy bunch. I like that. And he chose that. If it was good enough for him, I guess I am too. What a relief. Thank you, Ken, for reminding me of that. In a way, it gives me permission to admit I'm imperfect and still accepted into God's family through Jesus. I already knew that, but somehow my brain doesn't always allow me to accept that. Why is it so hard to accept that gift sometimes? Is it just me? Anyway, thank you, your faithful listener. Dun-dun-dun-dun. Say it.
Is it Mariana?
It is.
Okay.
Thank you, Mariana. It's always fun to know that certain people that I talk to during the week and on Saturday mornings that catch me in the hall and just say little bits and pieces about how they enjoy the podcast. But you always write in too, so that makes it even more fun. So thank you for that. I agree. It was a great message and a great reminder that in the end, God chooses us and makes us part of that family if we want to be. And like Melanie just said, here at Whole Life, we definitely want you to be a part of that family as well. So origins this week, and we went from bad apples on the family tree. Tell me we've got like pecan pie with ice cream or something. I don't know. Is it food all the way through? No.
Well, now, are you trying to bait me into another boxer kind of a thing? So.
You just go where you want to go, Mister.
Well, we'll see if I can find some more appels for next week. We'll see.
If you show up to church with a lapel, we might. I'll give you a prize or something. I don't know. Do we have anything to give away? Probably not.
Chappelle, isn't it? That's like
Randy will
my
give you a
name
hug.
is, or I call myself something, right? A Chappelle, right?
A what?
French. We're talking about French, right?
I thought we were talking about Dave Chappelle.
It's Portuguese.
Oh, it's Portuguese. Oh goodness.
Wow. We have some.
Speaking of messy.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about this week?
We're talking about origins.
Still doing origins, but this week we're going to get into Jesus' immediate family. So we're going to be talking about Joseph and Mary, and we're going to be talking about
crazy
the
kids.
Holy Spirit. So we're gonna talk about.
Those were the original holiday road trippers, right?
Yeah.
The crazy ones like, let's pregnant, let's go. Come on,
know.
it'll be fine. What could go wrong?
Caesar making them travel during Christmas time.
I borrowed a really good donkey. What could go wrong? Anyway, can't wait. As much as I tend to be a Grinch around Christmas time, it's always good and it's always fun and it's always some of my favorite messages that look at Christmas time and the Christmas story differently. And so this is I'm sure going to be some of our favorites moving forward. And it's December 3rd, guys. You are quickly running out of time, as my youngest continues to tell me every day, Dad, how many days till Christmas? It's almost Christmas, Really? How do you know? Because it's cold. And I was like, okay, child, you have no idea what cold is, but thank you for bringing us up to date. So, all right, that's going to do it for this week. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a great week.